Round one of the Grand Chess Tour Zagreb tournament started today, and I'm going to show you the game between Anish Giri with white and Magnus Carlsen with black. So these two are real rivals. At least if you watch their Twitter feeds, you'll see that they like to poke at each other. So their games always have this bit of added extra spice to them. And we were in for a real treat with this game today, and this was certainly a spicy encounter. Well, for one player at any rate. It burned. Oh, it burned. Giri with white, and against Magnus Carlsen's Sicilian, instead of taking on the open Sicilian, he played bishop b5. So this is a calmer route to take. You might recall that Carlsen has been playing g6 a lot in this position with some success. It has to be said, very successful. Against Caruana in the last round of Norway chess, he played knight f6. Now that wasn't so successful. And today he played a third move, e6, which has a good reputation. I remember Gelfand playing this a lot against Anand, for example, in their World Championship match. And was successful with it. It is more complex than, well, I'm not going to say more complex. A lot of these lines are very complex, but it can lead to very dynamically balanced positions. Now, of course, you can just castle here. Personally, that's the move that I like to play. But Giri took on c6 to damage the pawn structure. So now we have a tense situation where black has to be careful with how he handles this pawn mass in the center. For example, if black plays d5, I think this is basically a mistake, transposes to a kind of Nimzo-Indian, where, well, white is many tempi up, and you can immediately target that pawn, even with a move like this straight away, to blockade c5, and then to play the knight to a4, bishop to a3, and then c5 is just too weak. So black has to be more circumspect with the pawn advances in the center. At least, well, I won't give anything away. Knight e7 is the normal move. If the knight comes to f6, then that can be driven away. It's a bit annoying, and also stops the pawn coming to d6 for the moment anyway. So knight e7, so that knight perhaps coming to g6, and h4 is obviously designed to push the knight from g6, so Carlsen blocks with h5. Now there are pros and cons to this move. The g5 square can be a bit weaker, and that's why e5 is played actually. So for example, in a variation like this, if black tries to break down white centers, this is one of the big ideas in this variation for black, that you exchange off this pawn and only then advance your pawns through the middle. But actually this one isn't so clear, because with the inclusion of these h-pawns here, you can see that these squares are weaker. That's one of the reasons why white is playing h4. So it's quite subtle stuff, this actually. So anyway, after e5, Carlsen played d6 very quickly. Now, very interesting strategic decision. A kind of move that I think Giri would look at with a frown if it were played by anyone else apart from the world champion. Because positionally it's ugly. Because after this exchange, you can see black is left with these doubled isolated pawns. Now this has only been played once before, in a game between Motilev and Fedorov. Now Fedorov, very interesting player, plays quite dynamic chess. And you can do this, so basically what black does is accepts that he's got a bad pawn structure on the queen side, but this king side pawn structure kind of makes up for it. Frees this bishop. Yes, white has a nice square for the knight, but that's still very double-edged. And Carlsen is perhaps intending something similar. Now he played knight g6 instead. Interesting. Keeping an eye on that h-pawn. And here, Giri was obviously kind of slightly thrown by this rather unorthodox and quite brazen idea of Carlsen's. He thought for 20 minutes here. Now for me, a normal move would be to play, let's say, the knight to a3. The knight to a3 to land that on c4. Now, you could just take back on d6 and drop the bishop back here. You could also play e5 straight away if black wants to play as in that game I showed, and put the bishop on g4. So you can see how black gets quite a lot of activity. In this case, it's black using the fact that in this case the g4 square is weakened by these h-pawns advancing. And this is a very dynamic position. But it seems to me that knight a3 is kind of the obvious way to play. But Giri, I mean, maybe he overthought this. Fine, the knight wants to come to c4, but it's removing the knight from the king side. And I think it's just a bit too sophisticated, actually. Here, taking this wouldn't be very good. So, for example, here, and then rook takes h5. And white has the initiative. White is breaking through on the king side. But Carlsen just played bishop a6, looking at the knight here. Yeah, it's interesting. If white were to play g3 now, a safe move to protect that pawn, then actually black can already go into this endgame. And I think black has a pretty good initiative here, actually, after knight e5. You can see that it's not easy to attack these pawns. There could be weaknesses later on, but for the moment, black has a huge initiative. And on castle queenside, you can see black's pieces really active. The rook already on the d file. I think black has great potential in that position. So I kind of understand why Giri wanted to do something else. So he played queen f3 after 15 minutes, but well, this queen is about to go on an adventure, and maybe a misguided adventure. Carlsen took on c4. Now if pawn takes, then knight e5 guards the pawn, attacks the queen, and then queen d4 is a bit uncomfortable for white. I just want to take this pawn, actually. So after bishop takes, Giri threw in queen takes pawn check. Now black's king, you can see it's surrounded by so many pieces. In fact, it's not badly placed on f8 at all. And now it's possible to take on h4 without fearing g3. And in principle, I think that trade has been advantageous for black. I really like black's kingside pawn structure. The king is completely safe on f8. This knight is kind of buzzing around, a bit irritating for white. Where's the king going? That's a big question. Actually, it would really like to go to the queen side. That's where it has the most pieces. That's actually where it's safest. But how do you get it there? Bishop d2 is kind of the obvious way. But then, well, watch out, because let's attack the queen. The queen's got to hang on to that pawn. And now queen d4. Very annoying move. And actually in this position, I think black can actually get away with taking that pawn. I don't think there's a way to trap the knight. And, well, in that case, black would be better with this, you know, fantastic potential of these kingside pawns. So coming back here, castles by Giri. Now, that king doesn't have a huge amount of cover. If black can arrange things to get an attack, well, let's see. Now here, Giri quite quickly played knight e2 to cover the d4 square. Well, Carlsen criticised this move after the game. But let's see, after rook d1, I think Giri would have been worried about knight d4. Black still is able to generate a very dangerous initiative here. h4 with the potential of h3. The king is very secure on f7 to connect the rooks. It seems to me that black has enormous potential for attack in that position. So knight e2 played anyway. Rook c8. Now, really, the queen should be heading back to the king side to protect the king. But after queen f3, g5 is a very inviting move. I mean, it's fantastic how black has so much potential with these pawns. We just want to push and you know, just keep hassling the queen. That knight is very strong here. Maybe the bishop coming to f6. Very powerful. Instead of queen f3, I still think that was the best chance. Giri put the queen on a4, which that is a long way from protecting the king. And now rook c7, excellent move. Apart from the fact that it protects that pawn, not that I don't think Carlsen will be very worried about that. There are two things. This rook can potentially double up on the open file, but also it's making room for the queen to hit the long diagonal. And that's what happens very quickly. c3 played, well, not only to cover the d4 square, but to prepare rook d1. And here they go. Rook d1. Rooks are exchanged. Queen is attacked. Went into the corner. And this is a fantastically strong square for the queen, because now it's time just to rip open the king side. Black's king completely safe here. I love the way black's kingside pieces are just so compact. And there's really no defense to h4 now. h3 played, and here Giri resigned. Shocker. Let's have a look. Well, if pawn takes pawn, that one is pretty simple. The queen comes in, and with white's queen in Siberia, this one is just going to be destruction. Okay, what else we got? Well, you could try to exchange queens. This is a bit desperate. Just take on g2. If the queens are exchanged, we've got a rook h1 check, skewering the rook here. King f2, we've got g4. Okay, if the queens are exchanged, actually black is just winning material very easily here with bishop h4 check. And here's the point, that if king g2, we've got knight e3, forking king and rook. And if a piece interposes, we take here. This is not good news for white. And checking is not going to help. We can do this, and obviously black is just a piece up for nothing. Coming back here, if knight takes, that one is rather strong. And let me see, coming back here, pawn takes, this is actually winning. Exchange everything off. And rook h1, threatening pawn here. And this one is potentially coming soon as well. Let's say king f2, queen e4. Wow, not good. So that was 23 move win for Carlsen. After the game, Anish Giri said He's a little bit of a mirror. He's showing you your stupidity. Well, it's true that Carlsen here completely tripped up Anish Giri, and I think this was a very clever opening choice from Carlsen because he didn't play g6 that he's been employing with some success recently, but he played e6. Giri not so familiar with these lines, and this whole idea of d6, even though it upsets black's pawn structure, damages black's pawn structure, it's really dynamic, and Giri simply couldn't cope with the change of gear. Great stuff. Thanks for watching, and remember, there's a Carlsen playlist, there's an Anish Giri playlist, and well, do check out their previous encounters as well. Thanks for watching.